Yeah, that was my. I still can't figure out why. I've had this computer for 4 or 5 years, and I still can't figure out how to make it stop doing that. You know, what happened to? Oops.
It just wants you to know you're not in complete control.
Yeah, I mean, as if I didn't know that already. I mean,
Rabbi, who taught you how to do Zoom?
uh, as with most things having to do with technology, I learn by trial and error. I am
Hmm.
an incorrigible trial and error person. And so, for whatever reason, I resist all attempts to receive training in these things, and I just blunder through until I figure it out myself. I think,
Okay.
in as much as I can justify that, it's because I think that in the way that I learn, if I learn something, you know, myself, so to speak, as opposed to being told it, I tend to remember. Whereas if someone shows me how to do something, very often I will not remember the next
Hmm.
when I need to do something.
If
And
you figure it out yourself, then it makes sense, and
yeah,
that's why you can remember.
it gets sort of implanted in my neural network
Right. Right.
somehow
Yeah.
if I do it myself. And if someone tells me, then it just doesn't happen that way. So
You're just learning by rote then.
yeah, no, by so my Zoom, I'm always amazed by Zoom because on one hand, um, I can't believe how much better I am at it now than I was when this whole thing started. And the other thing I can't believe is that that it seems that every week I learn something new about Zoom. And
Oh well,
uh,
that's good.
yeah, and so today Rhonda was giving a talk to the staff, and she had this challenge, and I learned something completely new about Zoom in trying to help her, and so I was very grateful for her.
Ah.
only,
Ah.
not only for needing the help, which is always great when you get to help someone, um, but also that it was something that I thought I knew but I didn't, and then I had the opportunity to learn. Um,
Ah.
so that was kind of cool. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so Vaikravu Yemei David Lamut, right? So the days of David to die draw near, right? That they came close, right? And he ordered, or in this translation, it says charge,
Shlomo,
right? That
Shlomo,
Shlomo, his son, and this is what he
Shlomo.
says, right? So very interesting, right? That David's deathbed speech is presented as being a series of admonitions to his son Solomon, sort of his advice to Solomon what he should do. Right? But I find it really interesting, and I don't know if you all notice this, but I find it really interesting that it's not simply advice, right? And I wonder to what degree, in this regard, that the Jewish custom of an ethical will. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of an ethical will, um, but there's this idea, right, that there's the estate you leave to your children, the money and the property and the possessions and all that sort of thing. But that the most important thing is actually the ethical will. And so there are wonderful collections of ethical wills. What's
Mhm.
interesting, and I don't know to what degree this speech um, becomes sort of a model for that, but what I think is so interesting about this speech is that much of it is not actually about Shlomo, right? It's more about Shlomo uh, doing David's bidding, doing things that David couldn't do when he was alive, right? For whatever reason, but that Shlomo would be able to do. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, I just want to say that legally, this kind of language is called precatory.
What is it
Pre-
called?
it's called precatory language in the law.
Okay,
In Italian, I pray, prego.
right,
He's asking that his descendant, his heir, do this, but it's not really enforceable.
right. Right, exactly. It's not, and it's really interesting, actually. I think it's a fascinating thought. I didn't know that there was such a word, purgatory. But I think it's so fascinating, right, that in Shlomo's uh, uh, performance of some of these things that David encourages him to do, right, he doesn't actually go out and do it, right? He sort of he sort of sort of meanders a bit, waits for people to give him an excuse to do what he needs to do, just like what we see with Adonijah in the last chapter, right? Adonijah says, please don't kill me, right? And David and Shlomo says, well, if he's a good man, he'll be fine. But if he does wrong, I'm not going to hesitate to punish him. And so, so I think there are many, there's several, there's not so many of these in here, but a couple of them kind of go that way. All right. So I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, right, and show thyself a man. And here it actually is a man, La'ish, right? Not a person, but a man. So this is a gendered term here. Right? V'shamarta et mishmeret Hashem Elohecha, right? And keep the charge, same word, shamarta et mishmeret, right? Keep the keepings of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, right? Lalechet, very interesting, right? Lalechet bidrachav, lishmor ukotav, mitzvotav, mishpatav, ve'edotav, right? So to walk in his ways. So this word, right, lalechet, literally means to walk, right? Jewish law is called halacha, right? The path, the walking, and what I just learned this week, that in Islam, Sharia, right, the idea of Sharia law, right? Sharia it literally means the path to the oasis. So there's this connection also to Islam, right? That
Is there another way of translating it as the way?
right, exactly. Halakha can also be the way. Although I do think that in halakha there is such an overwhelming association um, with motion, right? That it's not simply a static route, right? It's about the movement along that path. Which and I don't know enough about Arabic or Islam to be able to say whether or not that's there's something equivalent there. But I was really interested to know that about Sharia. So very interesting. And again, like, where does that word halakha come from? Right? What's the source of it? I don't know the answer, but it seems to me, right, that this would not be a bad candidate for a verse to sort of point to when we say, well, why is the Jewish legal tradition called halakha? Right? In part, it's because, right, that the charge of God, right, is to walk in God's ways. Right? And then there are all these various categories of legal statutes, right? So statutes and commandments, ordinances, and testimonies, according to that which is written in the law of Moses, the Torah Moshe, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. So whatever you do and wherever you go, if you follow these rules, everything will be good.
Could I just add that the Quran is to be read along the lines of the maybe halacha is to?
Yes. Well, actually, this could be a whole huge digression, but it is really interesting, right? That the Quran, like the Torah, right, is not generally read literally, right? And the the Quran, much more than the Torah, right, is really poetry through and through. And so there are relatively few things, so I've been led to understand by this book that I'm reading, where the Quran is clear about what the rule actually is. And so this is among the reasons why there are so many different traditions, Islam, about what the Islamic law is. And which is not untrue also of Judaism. There are obviously a lot of differences as well, but I did find that to be very interesting, right? That it's very difficult once you get into it in a serious way to take the Bible literally, right? Because it's, what does it mean to take it literally? It's very complicated.
What's the name of the book about the Quran that you're reading?
I'm reading, it's called, hold on one second, I'll get it. It's a brand new book called Demystifying Sharia. What it is, how it works, and why it's not taking over our country. Which is very interesting to me, but that is still a question, because even when I was still a rabbinical student, I remember that there was this whole craziness back in the early 2000s of people claiming that somehow Sharia law was going to take over the United States.
Yeah.
The author is Sumbul, Sumbul, Ali Karamali, Ali dash Karamali.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I've so far I've really enjoyed it. Anyway, but back to David. Okay, and why is it so important to walk in God's way and to keep his statutes, right? Because then what will God do? Right? Lama'an yakim Adonai et devaro, right? That he may establish, right? That he may fix his word, which God spoke concerning me, saying, if thy children take heed to their way and walk before me in truth with all their heart and all their soul. What does that sound like? 100%, right? Right? All of a sudden, David has become a mouthpiece for Deuteronomy. If you follow my rules, then everything will go well, right? And they walk before me in truth with all their heart and all their soul. There shall not fail thee, said he, a man on the throne of Israel. So this is one of the most, and this is actually, sort of in, I don't know how Alter translates it, but this is one of those moments that is really important in the current debate, right? And is a factor in the article that we're going to read for next week, right? Is the Davidic promise, right, unconditional, right? Meaning that the Davidic line will always thrive, right? Which we know historically not to be true, but leads to the sort of idea that the loss of sovereignty of Israel is a temporary thing, and eventually the Davidic line will be reestablished in the context of the Messiah, right? Or is it, as it's presented here, right? Is it a conditional promise? If you follow the rules, everything is going to be okay. But if you don't, all bets are off.
But Rabbi, isn't that always the case throughout the Torah?
I think so.
If you do this, that, and the other thing, then you will be rewarded. And if you don't, then you'll have drought and famine and who knows what.
Yes, I think that I think that is what you're bringing, Connie, is the epitome of what is I don't know. This is what I call. I'm sure other people call it this too. It's not. It can't possibly be original with me, right? But the only reason I say that is maybe I'm wrong and people call it something else. Not that not that I
What you call what?
I
Deuteronomic,
can't hear you.
Deuteronomic
We-
theology.
We can't hear you because you're too far away from the microphone, I think.
This is what is Deuteronomic theology, right?
Yeah.
If you follow the rules, everything will be great. If you don't follow the rules, not only will things not be great, they will be terrifying and awful, right? You either have blessing or you have curse, and there's no in between, right? I tend to call that Deuteronomic theology. I don't know that that's an accurate term, but that's what I call it. And but I do think Connie, that there are many other parts of the Bible, right, that are not quite so black and white, right? Many parts of the Bible recognize that the world is a complicated place and that you can follow all the rules and things will still not go well, right? The primary exponent of this in the Hebrew Bible is Job, right?
Right.
Job,
Right.
right? And so whenever anyone tells you, oh, all you have to do is follow the rules and everything will be fine, right? The Bible has equipped us with a rejoinder to such people who have such simplistic ideas. All right, so here the idea is if Solomon follows the rules, then there will always be an heir of David on the throne. Moreover, he says in verse 5, moreover, thou knowest also what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did unto me, even what he did to the two captains of the hosts of Israel, unto Avner, the son of Ner, and unto Amasa, the son of Yether, whom he slew and shed the blood of war in peace, and put the blood of war on his girdle that was about his loins, and in his shoes that were on his feet. There, do therefore according to thy wisdom, and let not his hoary head go down to the grave in peace. Right? Very interesting, right? That David has sort of kept his powder dry vis-a-vis Joab, but makes it clear to his son that unlike David, Joab should not die a natural death. On the other hand, in verse 7, show kindness unto the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and let them be of those that eat at my table. For so they drew nigh unto me when I fled from Absalom, thy brother. So if you don't remember, Barzillai was one of the guys that equipped David's men with food and provisions and equipment, right? When they were in the wilderness, when Absalom had taken over, right? And David wants to make sure that he is not forgotten. Okay. And behold, there is the Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite of Bahurim, who cursed me with a grievous curse on the day when I went to Machanaim. This is in the same context, right? But he came down to me to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put thee to death with the sword. Right? So David is being very clever. David reveals himself as having been very clever. Right? I'm not going to kill you, right? But I never said that I would protect you, so to speak, after my death. So he says to Solomon, now therefore hold him not guiltless, for thou art a wise man. He ish chacham adam. You are man of wisdom, right? And you know what you ought to do unto him, right? And his hoary head also, right, should be brought down to the grave with blood. So very, very, very interesting, right? That as Jeannie said, right? These are, what did you say, Jeannie? Pregatory?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it really means like, please do this.
I mean, but it's very interesting, right? That he seems to be sort of suggesting, right, along with saying, you have to follow all the rules, right, that God has imposed, right? That to me feels like a interpolation, right, of the kind of Deuteronomic ideology. Follow the rules as they're supposed to be followed, and then after that we get the actual David, right, who is all about realpolitik, right? He's not
Right.
about he's
Right.
obviously not about following all the rules, right? He's obviously about making sure that political power is is maintained, right? So he clearly sees that Shimei would potentially be a threat to Solomon. He clearly sees Yoav as a threat to Solomon, but he sees Barzillai as someone who needs that Solomon somehow needs to be told, right, that Barzillai is someone who is an important ally. Right? And David slept with his fathers, right, and that's it, right. Vayishkav David im avotav. He slept with his fathers. Vayikaver be'ir David, and he was buried. So after all of that, right, he says his last words. And so interesting, right, for David, this sort of very he's a person of conflict and so on and so forth, that his final words, right, are about the scores that need to be settled, right? Very interesting. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron, and 33 years reigned he in Jerusalem. And Solomon sat upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was established firmly. So he's probably the firmest of all the kings, right? He's the one king who is comes directly after the founder, right? And he is well established. All right, so now we're going to have basically the rest of the story is the rest of this chapter. I mean, we could stop now, right? David is dead, but the rest of this chapter now concerns the sort of the afterlife of David's requests and advice to Solomon, right? So Adoniah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and she said, "Comest thou peaceably?" Right? Are you here to make war, or are you here to be just, a subject? And he says, "Oh, I'm coming peaceably, and I have something to say to you." And she says, "Go ahead, talk." And he said, "Thou knowest that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel set their faces on me, that I should reign. Howbeit the kingdom is turned about, and it is become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And now I ask one petition of thee, deny me not." So very interesting. What is he saying here?
Well, he's pointing out that he was the king, sort of like Trump is the president,
Yeah.
ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Like, he seems to be saying two things at once, right? He seems to be saying that I'm the rightful king, right? And the only reason that I'm not the king is because of God, right? It's sort of like Trump, as you're saying, right? So he can say, I am actually really still the president. The only reason I'm not the president is the voters chose Biden over me.
Right. But he's
Yeah, but
putting it in,
nevertheless, he's telling Bathsheba that you owe me.
Yeah.
and he's putting it in the past tense. He said, Hayatah. Is that am I right?
I'm sorry, where are you?
15, is it? That I was he's saying I was the king.
Yeah, I mean,
And therefore I have some claim. I have some credit.
You knew, right? You knew that the kingdom was mine, right? Or actually, yeah, right. I mean, tense in Hebrew can be a little bit complicated. So here they translated in the present tense. It's quite possible that it could be sort of the
But it says Yadati, at Yadati.
Das.
Eli Hayatah.
Right.
So you knew that I was,
Right, exactly. Right. So
right?
In the Hebrew, it's a past.
Yeah.
Sometimes that form is sort of like a uh, uh, they call it is a present continuous, something like this. So that the knowest there that they put is actually you could make
I'm
an
just,
argument for that being present tense. Like you learned at a certain point, and you still know it. But you're right that she knows this. You're exactly right, right? That Bathsheba knows that, according to the sort of actually kind of non-existent laws of descent, right? That he should have been king, right? And the only reason this happened, right, was because of God, and so he thinks he has the right to ask a petition. And he says, please say, right, speak, you say unto Solomon the king, for to you he will not say no, that he give me Abishag the Shunammite to wife. What? Who remembers who Abishag is?
Yeah, she gal who warmed up David
Right.
before he was dead.
He was David's foot warmer. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why does Adonijah want Abishag?
Well, she was supposed to be very pretty.
She was. Oh, right. Okay. So, right. So she's beautiful, right? She's a beautiful woman, and so that's probably part of the motivation, but probably not all of it. Yeah. Go ahead, Jeannie.
well, I guess the reason that he has to be killed because he asked for this is because it's like he's asking for a symbol of royalty in a way, of power.
Right. He seems to, and I don't, and to be honest, I can't quite fathom why he do this unless he had a kind of a death wish. He basically seems to be saying, give me the king's concubine.
Oh.
Right. So Avshalom, when he wanted to demonstrate that he was now king, what did he do? He, in a very sort of ceremonial and sort of almost ritualistic kind of way, went and slept with all the king's concubines
While he was away, right?
Right, exactly. And here it appears to be that even though Abishag wasn't a concubine, right, that she was the closest thing that David had to a concubine at the end of his life, and so Adonijah wants to sort of claim that, and somehow it seems to me that he has sort of drive to set himself up as a rival to Shlomo, which seems to me that that there's no way for Shlomo to react to this except for feeling that he has to kill Adonijah. So Bathsheba says, and again, Sheba here is presented as being very sly, right? If she actually cared about Adonijah, she would probably say, I don't think that's a good idea, right? I wouldn't do that because I don't want you to be killed. But she's like, sure, I'll go, right? I'll go and do that. Right? Bathsheba therefore went unto King Solomon to speak unto him for Adonijah. The king rose up to meet her and bowed down under her and sat down on his throne and caused the throne to be set for the king's mother. She sat on his right hand. Very interesting, right? At the right hand of the king, right? That is a place that is reserved for a very favored person.
Well, also, there would be no reason for Bathsheba to say, I don't think it's a good idea that I ask Solomon for you. Her job is to protect Solomon. That's her son.
Exactly.
She has to warn Solomon that Adonijah seems to have some kind of ambition.
Right. And this is why I just don't understand Adonijah at all. It just seems like such a hand-handed move. But he's not presented as the shiniest penny in the pocket. So it's possible that he's just not that smart and he's doing dumb things. And she said, right, it's a real seat of honor to be seated at the right hand of the king, right? Especially in some sort of throne that seems to be, in relation to his throne. Right? And she said, I ask one small position of thee, deny me not. And the king said unto her, ask on, my mother, for I will not deny thee. And she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given unto Adonijah thy brother. And King Solomon answered and said unto his mother, and why dost thou ask that? Right? You should ask for him the kingdom also. Abishag is to give him the entire kingdom, right? For he is my older brother, even for him and for Abiathar the priest and for Joab the son of Zeruiah, right? So you basically, if you do that, mom, right, you're basically saying that there should be a coup, and that Joab and Abiathar will, renew their attempts to overthrow the legitimate king. And then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, God, do so to me and more also. Right, this is a common vow in the Bible. Right? If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, then God should do that to me instead. Right? If Adonijah have not spoken this word against his own life. Right? So basically, Adonijah has written his own death sentence. And now, therefore, as the Lord liveth, who hath established me and set me on the Lord of David my father, and who hath made me a house, as he promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death this day. And then, the actual scene of the execution, right, is very quick, right? And King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah, the son of Yehoiada, and he fell on him so that he died. Right? That's it. Boom. That's the end. There's no more drama, right? Solomon decides, and that's it, right? And we sort of see this pattern, right? And unto Abiathar the priest said the king, get thee to Anathoth, unto thine own fields, for thou art deserving of death. But I will not at this time put thee to death, because thou didst bear the ark of the Lord God before David my father, and because thou wast afflicted in all wherein my father was. Right, so we see in Solomon, right, just as we did with Adonijah, right, who he basically waits on Adonijah. He seems, in retrospect, it seems reasonably clear, right, that Solomon knew that Adonijah was going to do something to justify his execution, so he just waited for Adonijah to do that. And here again, Solomon seems uninterested, right, in immediately executing the priest. Instead, he banishes him to his own town, right, and removes him from the service of the priests, right. And so Solomon thrust out Abiathar from being priest of the Lord, that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled, which he spoke concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. All right. And I think that Alter talks about how part of the motivation for this is that he doesn't want to appear like Saul, right, who killed all of Abiathar's brothers, and so he doesn't want to kill a Levitical priest. And then not finally, but almost finally.
Rabbi,
Yeah, please.
excuse me, 27, that what you just read,
Yeah.
so that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled. Could you refresh my memory? What has to be, what's the word of the Lord that has to be fulfilled by thrusting out Abiathar?
Because I think Abiathar is the last, if I'm not wrong, and I don't want to, so don't put too much stock in this. You could check and add in Alter. But if I remember correctly, it's that it was made clear, right, that in already way back towards even the beginning of the book of Shmuel, right, that the house of Eli was the priest in Shiloh when we, in the beginning of the book of Samuel, and he was seen as an ineffective priest, and his sons were corrupt. And so this is Abiathar is the last descendant of Eli. And so
Oh.
eventually he is, run out of town on a rail.
Oh.
And so there has to be a new priestly line. But don't put too much stock in that. I would have to Jeannie to make sure that I'm correct. And the tidings came to Joab, for Joab had turned after Adonijah, right? He had gone with Adonijah. He was like all of these Republicans who followed Trump, right? Though he turned not after Absalom, right? And what did he do, right? He fled under the tent of Adonai, right? Just like Adonijah did in the last chapter, and caught hold of the horns of the altar. And it was told to King Solomon, Joab is fled under the tent of the Lord, and behold, he is by the altar. And then Solomon sends his enforcer, Benaiah, the son of Yehoiada. I can't pronounce that last name. I'm sorry. Let me look in the Hebrew. It's probably Yehoiada. And it says, go and fall upon him. And Benaiah came to the tent of the Lord and said unto Joab, right, thus saith the king, come forth. And he says, nay, but I will die here. I'm not going to be killed. I'm just going to hold on to the horns of the altar until it's time for me to die. And so Benaiah says, okay, fine, I'll go tell the king that. Right. And he says to the king, right, thus says Joab, and thus he answered me. And the king said to him, well, do as he has said, right, and fall upon him and bury him, that thou mayest take away the blood which Joab shed without cause from me and my father's house. And the Lord will return his blood upon his own head, because he fell upon two men more righteous and better than he, and slew them with the sword, and my father David knew it not. Right? Very important, right? Even now, right? Even now that David is dead, right? Very important that he be clear of the murder of Avner, right? The son of Ner, who was Saul's person, right? And of Amasa, son of Jether, captain of the host of Judah. So shall their blood return upon the head of Joab, and upon the head of his seed forever. But unto David, and unto his seed, namely me, right? And unto his house, me, right? And my descendants, and unto his throne, me, right? Shall there be peace forever from the Lord. All right. So then Benaiah, the son of Yehoiada, went up and fell upon him and slew him, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. And the king put Benaiah, the son of Yehoiada, in his room over the host, and Zadok the priest did the king put in the room of Abiathar. Right. So now, what happened? Right? How is it possible, right, for Solomon to justify the killing of Joab if he's on the altar of the Lord? Right? A place that, if you're holding onto the horns of the altar, no one can kill you. How does he make that happen?
Well, I have to kill everybody. It has to be a little bloodbath for there to be peace forever from the Lord.
There we go. Right. It's like those when we had nuclear bombs, right? That were called peacekeepers or something like this. Yeah, peacekeepers.
There were deterrents.
Yeah, right. Well, actually, no. This I think actually is a very, very subtle and very, very cool sort of example of Solomon's wisdom. Right. We all know, right, about the baby. Right, that the one of the mothers wants to cut it in half, and the other of the mothers wants to give it to the mother that wants to cut it in half because she's the real mother, and so we have all these kind of examples of Solomon's proverbial wisdom. But here is one, right? What did Joab say? Nay, I'm going to die here, right? And the king said, yeah, he's going to die there, then fine. If he wants to die there, he can, he said it, not me. That was his idea. right? To die on the altar, right? So uh, he sort of takes Yoav's words literally, right? What Yoav meant was not that I'm going to die here now, right? But that I'm going to stay and sort of hang on to the altar until I die, right? But Solomon sort of takes him hyper literally and says, "Oh, he's ready to die right there, so go kill him." Am I making sense?
Yeah. This shows that two wrongs make a right.
Yes, and that is actually a really interesting factor, right? In the Bible, right? In I think also in other ancient literature, right, where we have this idea of blood guilt. That someone shed the blood of another person unjustly, right? Puts that makes that person that places blood guilt on that person, right? That means that person's sin, right, cannot be expiated unless his blood is also shed. And very interesting, right? This whole sort of long speech that Solomon gives, right? That 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 by um, by requiting that blood guilt upon Joab, right? Solomon makes it clear that he thinks that he should not actually uh, be tainted with blood guilt. And then, and I do think that this begins to make some amount of we can make some amount of sense of why Solomon is behaving the way he's behaving, right? In delaying, doesn't go out and murder these guys, right? He waits for them to do things that are wrong, right? And thus is deserving of death, right? So by requesting Abishag, right, Adonijah is committing treason, right? And we'll see with Shimei later, very similar, right? And with Abiathar, he doesn't want to kill Abiathar, right? Because he doesn't want to invoke blood guilt, right? But with Yoav, right, Yoav gives him a way out, right? That the blood guilt will be, this is just a requiting of the blood guilt that Yoav invoked by killing these two guys. And so Yoav's family will not have reason to come after the king. All right, so let's continue because we don't have that much more time. Then Benaiah, the son, right, he did that. Okay. And then, so we see, right, that Jehoiada becomes the chief of the army and Zadok becomes the priest. And the king sent and called for Shimei and said unto him, build thee a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and go not forth thence any whither. Or on the day thou goest out and passest over the brook Kidron, know thou for certain that thou shalt surely die. Thy blood shall be upon thy own head. Right? Again, right? We have this, rather than kill Shimei, what does Solomon do? He puts him in a kind of house arrest, right? And says, if you break the rules, right, you are sentenced to death and there will be no blood guilt. So Solomon clearly wants to keep things very, very clean. And Shimei said unto the king, the saying is good, as as my lord the king hath said, so will thy servant do. And Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. And it came to pass at the end of 3 years that two of the servants of Shimei ran away. And they told Shimei, behold, thy servants are in Gath. And Shimei, either having forgotten or thinking maybe that Solomon had forgotten, he saddled his ass and went to Gath to seek his servants. And he went and brought the servants from Gath. And Solomon learned, right, that Shimei had gone and had come back. And the king sent for him and said, did I not make thee to swear by the Lord? Right? I mean, it was a vow, right? And you can't go against your vow. Right? Know for certain that on the day that thou goest out and walkest abroad any whither, thou shalt surely die. And thou said unto me, the saying is good, I have heard it. Why then hast thou not kept the oath of the Lord and the commandment that I have charged thee with? And the king said moreover to Shimei, thou knowest all the wickedness which is in thy heart, which thy heart is privy to, that thou didst to David my father. Therefore the Lord shall return thy wickedness upon thy own head. Right? So Solomon is so slippery here, right? He made the rule, but at this point he's saying, this is not my punishment of you, right? This is God's punishment of you. Right? But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. So the king commanded Benaiah, poor Benaiah, he has to go out and kill all these people. This must be a bad job to have. And he went out and fell upon him so that he died. And as a result, right, he's done all the things, he's done all the nasty things that his father David said to do. And right, V'hamamlecha nachona b'yad Shlomo, right? It was firmly established, right? It was right. Nachon, means
Nachon, correct.
correct, right? So like it was established in the hand of Solomon. Now we won't read the story of Solomon now. We'll pick up that story at another time, right? But very interesting how this is sort of the height, in a sense, of the monarchy, right? Solomon is the height of the monarchy. After Solomon, things tend to sort of descend, shall we say, to the end of the books of Kings. All right. So questions and we lost Connie. That's too bad.
Yeah.
So questions, thoughts, reflections.
What are the great thoughts about this story? What are the big thoughts about the story?
I mean,
The big ideas.
That's a great question. All right, I open that question to the floor.
I'm bouncing it back to you.
Bloody.
Say it again, Ann.
Bloody. A lot of people were killed.
Yes, right. Lots of bodies.
Bodies.
It goes to show, right, that when you see a Hollywood movie with a big body count, right, that this is not the connection of violence in narrative is nothing new, right? We know this also from the Iliad, right? We know this from other ancient epics, right? That there's something very powerful in the human imagination about violent stories.
And
I don't think it needs imagination. I mean, they really did kill people.
Oh, right. I mean, and we kill people today. I mean, I'm reading now a book called The Splendid and the Vile, which is
Oh yes, I have that.
the story of the Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable.
Oh, yes.
How many people died in
Right.
in that war,
Right.
and just that it's just sort of it's just par for the course in human affairs. It's really,
Right, exactly.
really disturbing. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, this is something that I had from a professor of folklore, and it's not oral history, and it's not the Hebrew Testament, but he brought it up, and I thought it might have a place here. And what he said was that why are these stories so violent? And it's known in the Grimm's fairy tales about how things can get so gory, even in the children stories that we brought our children up on. What is that for? And he said the oral tradition has to deal in extreme images because it doesn't have any other ways of teaching things that we do in more recent kinds of forms of narrative.
Yeah.
We can dial things up and make things much more subtle, but originally we had to deal with like extreme images to have our stories be told and to have our themes be developed.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I, as the father of children, I was always amazed at how violent children's stories are. Even, even more modern ones. There's no shortage of death and violence and horror in Harry Potter, for instance.
Well, you know Bettelheim's explanation, don't you?
Who's?
Bruno Bettelheim.
No, but please share it, Phil.
He said that by telling these violent stories, the amorphous fears that children have are then made concrete, and they can deal with them more easily.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was going to say something that's probably slightly less sophisticated than that, but I was going to say that I do think, right, that when we tell stories to our children, right, there's a way in which we just like when we tell stories to adults, right, that we want those stories to be about really fundamental issues, right, issues of life and death, sex and violence, right? Those are the sort of most atavistic impulses we have, and if we're not dealing with them directly, right, then we are in a sense putting ourselves in the position of maybe acting out as opposed to turning them into literature and art.
Yeah, well, that's a good point of view too, but it wasn't what Bettelheim said.
No, Bettelheim I think is much more subtle than that. Go ahead, Anne.
I'll never forget reading that book by Abraham Sacher, The History of the Jews, well over 50 years ago. And it was a bloodbath.
Yeah. Right.
Awful.
I mean, right. And I do think, right, that, we in our country, at least certain parts of our country, like where we live, right, for the most part, we are insulated from a lot of this violence. But there's a lot of places where the violence is just sort of part of daily life in a way that feels very unfamiliar to us. So that's. So I think all of those things are. I mean, I think also, Jeannie, I would say in terms of big ideas, right, is that this sort of what we actually mentioned it today, right? This sort of tension, right, between the idea that if we just follow the rules, everything will be fine, versus the world requires sort of Solomonic wisdom to navigate, right? And we need to be both wise and ruthless in order to survive. It's not enough always just to follow the rules, right? So it's go ahead, Anne.
Well, maybe it explains why we don't get all that excited, not excited enough in my mind, about all the people that are killed every day by guns.
Right. I mean, right, exactly. Well, I mean, I also think we don't get, I don't know if there's any way for us to be, to fully fathom, right, the number of people that die unnecessarily each day, right? Whether because of guns or because now of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it, I think, is that, and I do think that this also might be part of the point of stories, right, is that our minds tend to have trouble bouncing back and forth between abstractions and the sort of detailed pictures, right? So somehow the death of a single person can have a greater impact on us than the death of 2,000 people a day to COVID.
Right.
Just
Right.
can't quite fathom what that means, but when someone we know dies of COVID, it has a really big effect.
Right.
Or if we hear the story of the individual.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a name, just the story drives it home.
Exactly.
rather than the abstraction, as you mentioned. What strikes me, one of the things that strikes me about the story is not only the violence, but the primitive sense of justice, that so and so has to be killed because he broke a rule which in our world wouldn't even exist, or even though we have so much violence, we don't. Unless a person is mentally ill, these violations of the rules don't merit usually death.
Right, right. Although it's very interesting. I mean, there's this idea of treason, right? We're sort of reintroduced to this idea of treason in the context of recent events, right? I just read a story today it was on the Apple News of some sort of evangelical conservative preacher saying that the government should start shooting Democrats and journalists who
Who said that?
some guy, some preacher somewhere, if it's proven that they did voter fraud, and he cited the fact that given the problems with lethal injection, that the government has decided that other forms of execution
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so we see still, right? I mean, among we could say, oh, this guy is an evangelical, he's a fundamentalist, and so he reads the Bible literally, and blah blah blah. But I think that there's still one of the reasons that this is such a powerful thing in the Bible, and I think it's still very powerful in human nature, right? Is this sort of idea of avenging wrongs, right? That somehow the way to get rid of something that's wrong is to punish the person who seems to have caused that wrong.
Well, that's what they had before we had the rule of law.
Right, but even in the context of the rule,
That was the rule of law.
Yeah, that was the only law they knew.
That was the rule of law.
Yeah.
And so we see from this story over and over again, and like at the end with Solomon ordering the death of Benaiah to kill somebody, Joab. Capital, that we have to have capital punishment, and it goes all the way back here to here.
It goes
much further back than that.
And before that, yeah.
Yes.
It goes all the way back in the biblical context. I'm sure that it did not start with the Bible.
Yeah, and before that, it goes all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, right.
Back to Cain and Abel, right? And what I think is so fascinating about that, right? It goes back, or at least it goes back to Noah. What I find so fascinating is that the first homicide, right, does not result in capital punishment. That Cain is not killed for killing Abel. So, and to remember, right, that whatever your other opinions of the Catholic Church, right, that the Catholic Church is staunchly opposed to the death penalty. So that so even though, right, we have a tradition in the Bible, both in narrative and in legal texts, right, that if someone murders another person, they should be put to death, right? We have a counter tradition, both within the Bible, right, and with we have a model here for even with Solomon, right? We have a model that life in prison, right, life in house arrest is an acceptable alternative to judicial murder, right? The fact that he broke the terms of his house arrest and was ultimately killed, right? You can make an argument that means that house arrest is not an effective way of restraining people. So that really, if it killed them, but Shlomo is clearly pointing, right, that there are ways to get around the need to kill them.
Yeah.
But if you break your house, if you violate the rules of your parole, you'll be killed.
Right, but
You
that was
still have to be killed, but at least this
the
is,
days of GPS trackers and so
Yeah.
now there's no excuse. But anyway, no, but
but
it is
if you're opposed to abortion because life is sacred, then you sort of have to be opposed to the death penalty if you're going to be consistent.
right. I guess you could also say vice versa. I do think that things are a little bit more complicated than that, especially in the reverse.
Well, if you are in favor of the right to an abortion, you may say it's inconsistent or problematic to be opposed to the death penalty.
You could, right? But I think the issue here is that the issue of abortion involves more than just the life of the unborn child or the fetus, or the continuing life of the fetus is one factor, but the life of the mother is the other factor. Whereas in the death penalty, there's no second person there. So I do think that those. I mean, yes, I can see some justification for yoking those two things, but I do think that they are distinct. They're distinct situations. Because in the case of abortion, you constantly need to be weighing the potential life of a child that
We can't hear you sometimes.
oh, sorry. In the case of abortion, you have to weigh, right, the value of the life of the child that is still a potential, right? It's not actually a person; it's a potential, right? Versus the actual life of the mother.
Yeah, it's not my argument. It's the argument of those who
Right,
are opposed abortion.
but I'm just saying why I don't.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but
Whereas in the
saying.
case of the death penalty, right there, the mother of that prisoner is yes, it will be affected by whether that person lives or dies, but it's not, that person is a complete and independent person, and the decision about he's not just potential, he's actually alive. So it's a little bit complicated. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And
Thank you. Okay.
Yasher Koach on coming to the end. So next week, everyone should bring cookies.
I'll make popcorn.
There we go. Along with the article, we'll all share our cookies, and
Okay.
and we'll have a good time.
Thank you.